MUST was established in collaboration with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT. We also inherited MIT's world-class system and culture.
Our mission today is to provide students and working adults cutting-edge education and skills that are current and relevant to industry needs and ensures 100% employability.
In fact, QS World University rating granted us 5 stars for teaching and learning because of our world-class faculty, 5 stars for employability of our students, and number 1 in Asia for international students.
One of MUST's keys to success is our ongoing collaborations with our industry partners to make sure that our curriculum meets the industry standards present and future. We enable our students to have future internships and employment opportunities. We work with other universities from all around the world to ensure that our students have the best academic experiences.
We specialize in 3 areas: transport and logistics, business management, and information technology.
Our Transport and Logistics School is the front runner in Malaysia with faculty members who have rail industry experience. We are also the founding member of Asia Logistics and Supply Chain Council with prominent industry players sharing their best practices. That's why our students are offered employment even before they graduate.
In this day and age where the pace of digitalisation is accelerating, we are continually developing innovative IT programs to meet the needs of industry and the IT world. As a mark of international recognition, the International Telecommunication Union has designated MUST a centre of expertise in the Internet of Things and IP version 6. In addition, MUST is a founding member of the Smart Industry Association Malaysia and has formed partnerships with multinational manufacturers such as Bosch and Daikin.
The business management faculty at MUST is led by industry experts, and this has allowed us to get membership with AACSB, which is the worldwide recognition for business schools around the world. Our MBA program is currently offered in many global centers such as China, India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, as well as Myanmar. When they complete the MBA program, they are business ready for employability in practically any sector at all. We were already having online sessions with our MBA candidates even in 2019, before the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. This is very important. Why? Because it allows us to combine groups of students from a transnational grouping, so that international exchange of ideas is something really incredible.
MUST is a leading Malaysian university of choice when it comes to PhD programs. We currently have more than 200 active students in our program. We have an outstanding track record in PhD supervision and guiding our students in publishing their research work in emerging fields such as Industry 4.0, digitalization, supply chain management, AI, and more. MUST's world-class faculty and researchers, along with our international recognitions such as AACSB membership, CMI UK, QS World University Ratings, and eQuiz, make us a highly sought-after school for postgraduate education.
Here at MUST, we have Students Experience and Affairs Department, also known as SEED.
Our Student Experience and Affairs Department takes steps to ensure our personal growth through programs that can help develop our communication and leadership skills, as well as teamwork.
We strive for our students to not only have the best academic experience, but also the best on-campus lifestyle experiences. We have weekly ongoing activities as well as different clubs and societies such as the Lunchtime Club, Bowling Club, Esports Society, and so much more.
As a MUST student, one of the perks we have is learning from Infinity Academy, which is one of the best performing arts training center in Malaysia. You would think that when you're going into technical courses that people are just focusing on IT and transport and communication, things like that. But when we go into performing arts, I saw most of my classmates breaking out of their shell. And it also is a benefit because I gain 10 academic credits.
A MUST student is someone with high integrity, commitment, great attitude and good values. I'm glad I've chosen this university as my stepping stone. 100% employability is what MUST aims for all students. I'm confident that I'll have a bright future.
So come and join us at Must.
I'm calling him now. That's Shafika.
Dr. Kamal, this is webinar, right?
Yes.
Okay, I will invite Prof. Sal.
Try again. Okay.
Yeah, Prof is in.
Prof already in, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please start.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Our Prof is also here now. All right, thank you for coming to this webinar. So the webinar will be handled by our Professor Emeritus, Professor Dr. Bajuya, who will be our moderator. And once our President, Prof. Dr. Prem Kumar is ready, so we'll start with his speech to greet the participant as well as the speaker. So I will hand over to you, Prof. Bajoyai.
Yeah, so we'll wait for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kamal. Yeah, I saw Prof. Dr. Prem Kumar is here already.
Yes.
Okay. Greetings to everyone. A very good afternoon and welcome to this MUST webinar on Malaysian economy after COVID-19. We are privileged this afternoon to have a few very prominent panelists to share with us their ideas about the topic on how we should recover our economy after COVID-19. Indeed, this is a $1 billion question, and we are looking forward to hear the ideas. But before we begin, let me introduce the panelists, and I want to first welcome Professor Dr. Prem Kumar Rajagopal, our President of Malaysia University of Science and Technology, who will be also the main panelist, but I want to welcome him to give the opening speech. Just a little bit of background. Prof. Prem Kumar has been the president of MUST, I think, for about 5 years. And he has been responsible, single-handedly turn around the university. And we are very fortunate to have him today to share perhaps his experience as well on how he can use his framework of turning around a university into turning around an economy. So let us begin by welcoming Professor Dr. Prem Kumar to give an opening speech and to start his discussion rolling. Prof. Prem Kumar.
Hi. Thank you, Thank you, Prof. Barjoy. Yeah. And first of all, I welcome Prof. Casadio from Health University. Thank you for uh, making yourself available for this slot for a discussion on the Malaysia's economy after COVID-19. Yeah. And not forgetting my friend, Prof. Jeff, okay, who is very actively in the media today, talking about Malaysian economy. Almost every week, he has got something up there for us to read and also to experience with him about his thoughts on the Malaysian economy. Um, so I don't want to take so much of time taking you through because the topic will be discussed in detail by these two gentlemen. Well, for me, I would just like to share my thoughts on the Malaysian economy, specifically to higher education institution. Yeah. At the beginning of 2020, March, when we were told that the higher education institution is going to have a shift from the conventional teaching and learning into the online teaching and learning, it was like a shock for most of the conventional universities. They were caught of not being ready to make the shift. But then there was some institution, small institution, with a very less bureaucracy, managed to make the shift, and not only just managed to make the shift, they made it a success. Yeah, they made it to be a success, and I'm happy to announce that Malaysia University of Science and Technology, we made it a success. Yeah, every threat that comes into an organization, we need to look for space how to address that threat and look for the opportunities within the threats. So for Malaysia University of Science and Technology, we made it, yeah, and we quickly adopted the digital efforts of transforming the university in various aspects, not just only teaching and learning, but also going into the so-called asset-light concept of the university. That was really beautiful. And then we also had drumming of either we swim or we sink. Yeah, that is, if we want to swim, we need to face the challenges. Yeah, and always be creative enough to come up with ways and means how to be successful in the higher education institution. And we managed it. We got it. Indeed, we got more than what we are supposed to hit our target. We hit more than what we were given, the targets that were given. And I think I'm happy to announce that we made a profit for year 2020. And looking at the second 2 quarters of 2021, again, I'm happy to say that we are actually going to not only hit the target that was given to us in 2021, maybe we will be getting beyond what we are supposed to get for 2021. Looking at the 2 quarters progress, yeah, January up to June. Indeed, our postgraduate studies doing very well, extremely well. Our PhD numbers has grown, and today we have got about 227 PhD students with us. Yeah, and well, there are students graduating, finishing the Viva too. So the Malaysian economy, despite the COVID-19 challenges, yes, it has given us a great push in certain aspects, in terms of face-to-face interaction with students and faculty members, but then it has opened a new channel for us, yeah, that is to enhance our presence in the online setting. Yeah, so we created the presence, and not only that, we creatively came up with bundling of our academic program. Yeah, bundling our academic program. Yeah, to further add value and to ensure the 100% employability, because end of the day, the responsibility of higher education institution is not just making profit, but to guarantee students' employability. So we hold to that principle very strongly. Yep. So that's just a little bit about the background to what we have done during the COVID and how we managed to sail. And it is not about sinking, but our university, we swim across beautifully. So with that, now I would hand it over back to Prof. Barjoy to take us through with the two gentlemen that we have who will shed more insight to the Malaysian economy after COVID-19. Thank you, Prof. Barjoy. Yep.
Thank you, Prof. Ramkumar. Okay, let me now introduce the next speaker. I will introduce the speaker one by one so that you will not forget about their background when you hear them speaking. Let me begin with, I don't know who want to start first, but I guess we should give the privilege to our guests. So let me introduce Dr. Paulo Casadio. He is an associate professor at the University of London program at HELPS, and he is an economist specialized in the interaction between business cycle and financial market, focusing on forecasting. He has been developing econometric model for the Italian economy. The names, I think, relate to his background. He must be an Italian. And he has also done work on Eurozone, forecasting the main economics and financial aggregates. He was responsible for asset allocation in asset management, building strategic and technical portfolios. In Malaysia, he taught different courses at postgraduate school, covering economics and finance. He has written many articles in international journal, covering on economic growth, consumption, consumption with wealth effect, financial market forecasting, and his current research interest is in startup, future of work, something very interesting, and Asian regional integration, building an Asian 10 countries as a whole. So with that background, we expect that he will be able to deliberate the topic well, and we want to now welcome Dr. Paulo Casadio to deliberate his speech. Thank you. Please welcome Dr. Paulo Casadio.
Thank you very much. I think for the organization, Jeffrey Williams will start the talk. For the moment, I thank you for the kind introduction, and I pass to you back the floor.
All right, okay. Okay, so let me then introduce Pro Jeffrey. I mean, he is our own professor at the Faculty of Business, and I have known Prof. Jeffrey for some time now, I think more than 10 years, and he has been in Malaysia for many years, I think. Prof. Geoffrey William is an economist with 28 years experience in macroeconomic policy analysis. He has worked with governments in the UK, Malaysia, Europe, Middle East, and Asia with leading international companies and policy organizations. He was a graduate from the University of Cambridge. He held academic positions at London Business School, Pembroke College of the University of Oxford, and the University of London. Prof. William is a fellow of Chartered Management Institute and was elected fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in 2004. He is also a fellow of the Malaysian Institute of Management from 2010. His current research interest is in macroeconomics, future of work also, and sustainability and ESG finance, higher education management. He has been a regular commentator on economics and social policy in the media currently. So please welcome Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Prem. Thanks for everyone for coming. I'm going to share our screen, or my screen, for the slides. Please let me know when you can see it. What we want to do today, whilst I'm dealing with the sharing, is, hold on. Cool.
Okay.
Okay. Well, like that. Don't need to buy. Normally.
Sorry, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes, Prof. We can see that now.
Let me try again. Hold on. I got to the end. We went to the end of the slides first. Okay, let's go to the beginning of the slides.
Yes.
Start at the end. All right, we won't start at the end. We'll start at the beginning. Okay, thanks again for coming. Thanks to Paolo for joining us today. What we want to do is to present some of our ideas about the economy over the last 18 months during the COVID crisis. And we're going to do it in 4 parts. The first is I'm going to give you a brief overview of what's happened and where we are. Then I'm going to pass to Paolo, and Paolo's going to show you some of our scenario forecasts based on various projections as to the progress of the likely progress of the virus over the next few months before the end of the year. Then the third part, I want to discuss some of the policy options in the short term and the medium term, and then some of the structural issues that have arisen during the crisis. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. So we'll be very interested to listen to your questions or your comments. And if you want to signal them in the meantime, you can put them into the chat. And then Prof. Bajoya can then perhaps collate them for us at the end. Hopefully, we'll try to give as much time as possible for Q&A, because I think very many of you might have quite a lot of comments, and we very much enjoy the comments that people make. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just by reminding us all what has happened and where we are, as if we need to be reminded. We have had 18 months of the most extraordinary experience in terms of the economy. I think people often use the term unprecedented, but even for those people like myself who are getting quite long in the tooth now. I mean, I've been an economist for 30 years now. So even if I can say, over the last 30 years, we have never seen anything like this. And I remember my lectures in economic history at Cambridge, and I can't even remember anybody telling us anything in terms of economic history that has been like this. We have never seen a period when not just an entire national economy has been locked down, but the entire global economy has been locked down. And so the type of scenarios that we're dealing with are literally unprecedented. But then having said that, as economists, we are not without the tools of analysis in order to try to understand what's going on. The tools that we need to look at, which we'll discuss a bit more later on, are forecasting tools really, and scenario tools. But the scenario this time around is very different to the type of crisis that we've seen in the past, particularly here in Asia, because more likely in the past, let's say in 1997, when we had the Asia financial crisis, 97, 98, 99, recovery from that. And then in the period of 2008, 2009, what became the Great Recession, we had a financial crisis leads to the Great Recession. Both of these episodes are monetary crises. And what we've seen now is not a monetary crisis. What we've seen now is a real shock, a real crisis, where economic activity, real economic activity, that means what people do in factories, in firms, in households, in spending on the market, it just stopped. And we haven't actually experienced that type of thing. Even during wartime, we don't see the economy actually close down. We see in a war period, we see the economy shift from one form of civilian production, normal day-to-day production for consumers and businesses, and we see it shift into military and defense activities, but we don't actually see the economy stop. And so here in these recent months, we have actually seen the economy stop multiple times. And just there on the left-hand side, I've done a list to remind us all of the various times during the last 18 months that the economy has been closed in one way or another under what's called here in Malaysia movement control orders, more commonly known as lockdowns. Now, these lockdowns have varied. Sometimes we have a full lockdown, a very strict lockdown, where even movement within the local region, within 10 kilometers, for example, is very heavily restricted. Or sometimes they're easier, where we are asked to follow standard operating procedures. And we've gone through various of these phases over the last 18 months, as you can see, and there's a list of them there. And now we're moving into a period from the middle of June under the National Recovery Plan, where we are hoping, based on various indicators related to the progress of the virus and the management of the virus, principally the number of cases, and then the number of people who have been vaccinated, percentage of people who have been vaccinated, and then, of course, the pressure that's being placed on the health service. These are the three main indicators in terms of the National Recovery Plan, which will help us, hopefully, to see various stages where we can move to a complete opening up of the economy. And later on, we'll talk a bit more about the National Recovery Plan, because that's clearly a very important part of our scenario planning. Now, what I did when I created this little panel on the movement control orders was I actually worked out the number of days that we have been locked down. And I hadn't actually seen that before I did the analysis myself. And I think very many people also hadn't seen it before. And so there it is. It's there on the bottom right-hand corner. The number of days locked down during 2020 in various forms was 286 days, one way or another, which is 78% of the total time available for economic and business activity. Now, so far during this year, up to the end of July, bearing in mind that the lockdown this year started in the middle of January, we've had about 149 days, actually 149 days, which is about 70% of the total available time for economic and business activity, one way or another, being heavily restricted. So that is really very, very important. And it's also an indicator of the extent to which real economic activity has been disrupted. It's also very important for us to understand the comparison between what happened last year and what has happened so far this year in 2021, where it looks very much like the period of lockdown of one form or another during the rest of this year, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, will be very similar to the period of lockdown that we experienced during last year. And already we've had 70% of the available days this year in lockdown, and we expect probably as we move toward the end of the year, most of those days will also be in some form of lockdown. Now, what that means is, in terms of building economic scenarios, is we do now have much more information than we had at the beginning of the crisis back in March of last year, because we have the whole of the experience of last year to build on. And we can use that experience to tell us some idea, or give us some idea of what's going to happen this year in 2021, particularly the impact that closures have on the economy and the impact that that will have on various indicators. And later we'll look at GDP, employment, consumption, savings, investment, business activity, and so on. So that's quite important. What happened last year looks very much like it's being replicated this year. But the difference this year is that the economy is very much weaker this year than it was last year, because we've had to have those 286 days last year where people were under really very difficult circumstances in economic terms. Now, the government has put in place a series of stimulus packages. They all have different names. Most of them begin with a P, one way or another. I don't know why. I don't know why they begin with a P, but they all begin with, apart from Kita Prihatin, but they all begin with some sort of, they all have some names, and they're very, very creative in Putrajaya in dreaming up these names. And within these packages, we have various forms of assistance, and we divide these into two types. One is direct fiscal injection, which is direct cash transfers, and the other are indirect changes in policy, which don't necessarily involve a direct cash transfer from the government. The direct cash transfer, they include things such as the cash handouts to the B40 and to other groups, which are very simple cash transfers. Bantuan Prihatin CAS, I think they're called. BPK, is it? Rakyat, no, Rakyat, isn't it? Bantuan Prihatin Rakyat. Okay, these type of direct transfers. They would also include the wage subsidy, which is very significant and very useful for companies to help. There are some special grants for SMEs. All of those are under the direct transfers. Under the indirect transfers, we would include things such as the possibility of withdrawing savings from the EPF under the I-Lestari, I-Sina, and I-Chitra programs, various forms of soft loan, various forms of bank support from Bank Negara in terms of supporting business loans in particular, and of course the loan moratorium. And these are the very, very significant forms of indirect help that the government can offer. But of course, what's important about most of these forms of indirect help, particularly the EPF withdrawals and the loan moratorium, we've had two versions of the loan moratorium and three versions of the EPF withdrawals. What's very important about that is this isn't money that comes from the government. This is money that comes from people's savings or handling of the way in which they're being allowed to handle their loans, and particularly their loan repayments. So that is why Paolo and I coined this term, the Rakyat stimulus, because the Rakyat stimulus is actually money that is being put into the economy, which comes from the people themselves, the Rakyat themselves. Now, if we look at the bottom, we can see at the bottom of the panel on the the right-hand side, if we look at the rows at the bottom, we can see the difference between the direct and indirect injections. Last year, the total direct injections came to about 55 billion ringgit compared to the indirect injections, which were 250 billion. It's about 18% of the total amount available was direct, which leaves 82% that was indirect. And if we look this year, it's very similar. So far, 41 billion ringgit is in direct fiscal injections, about 184 in indirect fiscal packages. And so overall, the total direct investment has been 96 billion ringgit compared to indirect financing packages of 434 billion. Now that's very important because we know if we look at some of these indirect packages, such as the EPF withdrawal and particularly the loan moratorium, although there is a very significant amount of money made available potentially under these packages, not all of this money is used. Under the ICNA program, for example, the government had budgeted about 80 billion ringgit to have been made available for people who wanted to use it, and the total amount has been about 57 billion. So roughly about three quarters of the amount that was available has been used. And when it came to the loan moratorium, we found that after the end of the first loan moratorium, 85% of people actually started to repay their loans. So actually the people who were in need or made most use of the loan moratorium was only about 15% of the total number available. And again, the government estimates that that is about 80 billion in total, but only about 15% of people made use of that. And that's very important in terms of understanding the indirect packages, because what we know is, although it looks like a very large number, it does depend upon behavioral choices made by individuals. And so we can't assume that all of that money will be used, because many households, many individuals, many firms actually don't need it or they don't want it. And so although that's the total potential allocation, it's not necessarily the total amount of money that goes into the economy. Nonetheless, you can see that this is a significant amount of money, 530 billion. And I haven't included here, of course, the budget. The budget was the largest budget ever, 322 billion. And there was also a portion of that, 65 billion, that was available for various COVID packages, particularly for investment in the health services. So that's the scenario that we've been in. And this is sort of the impact of what has happened. Even with these significant packages, there has been a very significant impact in terms of the economic loss. Now later, Paolo will show you how we actually calculate the economic loss. But basically, the way we calculate the economic loss is to look at where the economy wound up, where it was, compared to where we would have expected it to be had we not had the crisis. And if we make that calculation, working out the difference between the expected potential rate of growth and the actual outturn of growth, we see that during 2020, the total loss due to COVID was about 129 billion ringgit, which is equivalent to 9.6% of the economy. Now that is very, very big. It's a very big chunk. Now the government did inject a great deal of money, as we saw just a second ago, and according to the government, that injection caused an uplift in GDP by about 4%. And actually, as you can see there, if you take an uplift of 4% from the loss of 9.6%, you get the balance of 5.6% loss, negative growth, which was actually the outturn for 2020. Now, so far this year, we expect that the total loss will be bigger. It'll be 164 billion. And that's because the economy isn't recovering this year in the way that had been forecast, for example, in January, where the official forecasters were forecasting 6 or anywhere between 6 or 7.5% of growth. And we also were of that view, Paolo and I, at the beginning of the year, we were also of the view that if the economy was able to open up, that we would in fact have experienced during this year some very buoyant growth, very good rebound during this year. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And so all of the forecasters were taken by surprise by that. We revised our forecasts very early, very quickly. We're able to do that because the official forecasters have a forecast timetable. Paolo and I can do our forecasts whenever we like. So we were able to update our forecasts, and we came to the view that, and Paolo will tell us a bit more about this later on, that actually the economy will be growing at a very, very sluggish rate during the course of this year. And so we expect total loss to be at least 164 billion ringgit, which is about 12% of GDP. Now, if unfortunately this continues into next year, the accumulated losses start to rise because where we would have been after 2 years of economic growth, where we are if we don't have any growth, makes the accumulated losses even bigger. So by 2022, we would expect accumulated losses of 230 billion, which is about just a shade under 17% GDP lost. Now, things can happen to make that different, but these are basically the losses predicted under certain scenarios, which we'll discuss a little bit later. Now, what we know from official data is that the crisis has had a big impact on various parts of the economy. So let's begin with consumption, households and consumers. We know that household savings have been very heavily hit, particularly the savings in the EPF, which are for pensions and withdrawals under the EPF, which are 107 billion ringgit. And for that, I include the estimate of 30 billion for iChitra. It would be 107 billion ringgit. What's interesting about that is that the amount of money from the EPF withdrawal is greater than the amount of money in direct fiscal injection from the government. And if we were to add in on top of that the loan moratorium, you would see that the amount of money coming from households and consumers is actually very, very much bigger than the direct fiscal injection from the government. Now, the EPF withdrawals for me is a very significant structural problem. And the total, based on a total member base of 15 million people in the EPF, which is the biggest national pension fund, about 6.3 million now have less than 10,000 ringgit in their account one. Account one is their primary pension account. Now, EPF also have account two. Account two is more like a saving account where people can actually withdraw. Now, because of the withdrawals already, 9.3 million have less than 10,000 in account two. Now, even that number there of 10,000 is actually quite optimistic because according to the public data from EPF, most of those people in account two, most of those 9.3 million in account two have nothing, actually. So if you say less than 10,000, most of them have basically nothing, 100 ringgit to keep the account open. Now that's a very significant structural problem, and it's particularly a problem for those who have less than 10,000 in account one, because that's their pensions. And the big question about the effect, the impact of this crisis is the effect, the long-term effect on, in this case, on pensions. What is going to happen when these people retire and they don't have any income? And that's a big structural question that we're going to have to deal with post-crisis. Another big impact has been on income, direct income, not just savings, but direct incomes. We'll see later on very many people have lost their job or have had to scale down in terms of the job that they do. And we can see that in the salary figures. The monthly median salary in Malaysia for people who are earning money from a salary fell by 15.6% in 2020. And that's the first time that it has fallen in 10 years. Basically, I think the first time since they started to publish this series at Department of Statistics. And that means that half of the population who are earning income from salaries, earn less than 2,062 ringgit. So that's an indication of how difficult it is in terms of people's income. Average incomes also fell. They fell slightly less, by 9%, but again, that was unprecedented. It's the largest fall ever. I think the first time they've fallen, average salaries have fallen in 10 years. And so average salaries are now less than 3,000 ringgit. Now, of course, what this means is that people are really struggling. And we'll see later a little bit more about how they're struggling. For businesses, I want to look primarily at MSMEs, this micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, because these are the backbone of the economy, especially here in Malaysia. 98.5%, 98.5% of all businesses fall into this category of micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. And according to the government itself, the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperatives, according to a survey that they did involving nearly 7,000 MSME companies, they are really struggling. They're running out of money, and by October, according to this survey, as many as 580,000 of these enterprises could close. And according to the MEDAC survey, this involves 7 million people losing their job. Each one of those people, according to the MEDAC analysis, each one of those people has a dependent of two other people dependent on their business. So 7 million would lose their job, and 2 people in addition to that, and that would be 21 million people affected if this goes on until October. And we've already seen the impact on the sector as a whole. In 2020, that the contribution of micro, small and medium-sized enterprises was 38.2% of total GDP, and that's fallen a little bit down from, in percentage terms, down from 38.9% before the crisis. The contribution to GDP is 512 billion, and that's fallen quite a lot. It's fallen 7.6%, because in the year immediately before the crisis, 2019, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises had a total income or total contribution to GDP of 552 billion. And they employ almost half of the workforce. So you can see that if these companies fold, that's going to cause a big problem, not just for the owners of the companies, but for the people who work for them. Trade and investment actually has been something that has been reasonably robust. Of course, it's been hit because the lockdown has not just been here in Malaysia, it's been global, but it's been Malaysia's main global markets. And if you look at the yellow line at the bottom, you can see the balance of trade. We can see total trade has actually held up reasonably well, all things considered, and it's a sort of minor trend upwards. Exports and exports and imports have also held up relatively well. And there were only 2 periods in April and July of last year when the balance of trade was actually 0 or negative. And that was the period when we had full lockdowns. But generally speaking, trade has been contributing to growth and will continue to contribute to growth. One of the important things to note about this is that the sectors which contribute are the traditional export sectors. These are palm oil, electronics and electricals and electronics. And in addition to that, there has been a significant contribution from hydrocarbons, from Petronas, from oil itself. And so we do hear a great deal amongst many commentators about how Malaysia must concentrate on high-tech trade and high-tech investments and high-tech products. But actually, Malaysia's trade has been supported, and the savior, if you like, almost the savior for Malaysia during this crisis has been the traditional palm oil, electricals and electronics, and Petronas. In fact, palm oil made a contribution in terms of trade, or is expected to make a contribution in terms of trade this year of 70 billion ringgit. And so palm oil is very, very important. And that's why our view on trade and investment is not so much that Malaysia needs to shift to high tech, but Malaysia needs to shift to high value. And later on, we will talk about what we mean by that, the difference between high tech and high value. They're not necessarily synonymous. There has also been quite a lot of discussion on foreign direct investment and the decline in foreign direct investment. Of course, that has been affected by the crisis because international investors overseas have, of course, been hit by lockdowns in their countries just as much as we have. But I think what's also important to remember in terms of the discussion on foreign direct investment is that this is a long-term trend. So if you look at these purple bars here, this is the data from the Department of Statistics showing us the net foreign direct investment over 20 years. We can see actually that for Malaysia, net foreign direct investment has been in decline since 2016. And so there are structural issues which are affecting Malaysia's foreign direct investment, not just the COVID crisis. Amongst these structural issues are simply that Malaysia is a small market And so as big markets, for example, Vietnam is 3 times larger. Indonesia is 9 times larger than 270 million people or something like that. It's 9 times larger. Philippines also is very much larger, I think 2.5 times larger. And so as these economies have been opening up and become more competitive, Malaysia has lost in comparative terms. So it's not necessarily that Malaysia is doing things wrong. It's just that, unfortunately, Malaysia is what it is. I mean, it's relatively small in terms of a market of only 30 million. Now, it has been a hub for international trade. People coming here and then using this as a base to trade across ASEAN and Asia and APEC more widely. But now these other countries, emerging countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, and places like that are catching up. And that's really what we're seeing since 2016, a sort of trend decline. Employment and the labor market. Well, what can I say about this? When we look at unemployment, unemployment has gone up, and you can see that from 2019 to 2021, unemployment's gone up by about 260,000 people, from about 500,000 to more than 770,000. But the unemployment figure itself masks the impact on the labor market because of the way that unemployment is defined and measured. Unemployment is defined as being someone who has not worked in the last month, who is available for work at whatever type of work is presented to them, and is actively looking for work. And so if you apply that definition, which is a standard global definition, there's nothing wrong in particular about that definition. We understand that as economists very well. The absence of any unemployment benefit in Malaysia means that people actually can't spend too much time without work because they don't have any other form of sustenance or support. So they very often don't meet that criteria of not having worked at all during the last month. They may have taken some ad hoc work or some short-term work. And that keeps the number of unemployment, the unemployment numbers low. So what we need to look at are underemployment figures. Underemployment is measured by the Department of Statistics in 2 ways. One is people taking jobs which are lower than the qualifications that they have. They call this skills underemployment. And the obvious example of this are airline pilots who take a job selling hamburgers at a stall at the side of a road. This is people, or people who formerly work in banks who are now e-hailing cab drivers or delivery drivers or delivery working freelancers or something like that. So this number has gone up significantly. It's gone up by 500,000. There's also a very large increase in the number of people who are working on shorter hours. They are formerly full-time employment, but because of the lockdowns, they are not working full-time. Now, if we add all of those numbers together, unemployed, underemployed, and shorter working hours, 3.2 million people, or 19.8% of the total labor market, has been impacted by this lockdown. 19.8%. And then you can see in the last 2 lines there, the number of people outside the workforce, and particularly the last number, the number of people outside the labor force has gone up by 250,000, but particularly the last number, which are people who have given up altogether. They're not interested in look for work or to find work. We often call these discouraged workers, and that's gone up by 5-fold. Now, this is very important, and Paolo and I can tell you a lot about this type of thing because of where we come from in Europe. During the 1980s, when we had significant recessions, when we saw this type of unemployment in Europe, it didn't go away. It becomes structural, and that's really very important for us to understand when we think about the exit from the COVID period, which we will have an exit. It will come some point this year, hopefully. We need to be realistic about the expectation as to whether people will immediately be able to go back into full-time, meaningful, well-paid jobs. Because our experience in Europe was during the 1980s that actually when people become unemployed, a very large number of them stay unemployed. Unfortunately, we call this hysteresis. They become de-skilled, they become demotivated, they become unused to the working environment. The jobs that they had, the jobs that they did, don't exist anymore. They have difficulty transitioning and retraining to find new types of jobs, and this affects very many thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. In the United Kingdom, it affected millions of people. Where I came from in Liverpool, for example, in the 1980s, we had a very significant real shock when the recession closed down very many of the industries and the docks and the manufacturing in the city. There were very high levels of unemployment, 60% adult male unemployment. And I know people who became unemployed when I was at primary school who never worked again, actually. They never had a job again for the rest of their life. And that type of thing is not uncommon across the whole of Europe, particularly South Europe, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and then pockets of Britain, pockets of France, pockets of Germany. And that type of experience is something I think Malaysia needs to be quite cautious about. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to pass to Paolo. Paolo is going to give us some, I think, some better news. I think some more positive news.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So now we move from what happened to what likely can happen. So we watch forward and we look for some scenarios. In this year and a half, we saw how sensitive is the economy and how the economy performance depends on health and health management. So we tried to work out the sensitivity of the macroeconomic scenario and performance to what we do and how we manage the virus. And we started with projecting what we are doing. So if we consider the lockdown and vaccine strategy, we got the first negative result. There is not much room for an economic management. Yes, you can delay the disruption in economy, but it's very costly and is increasingly costly. So this way forward is very difficult to forward, but we projected, and more or less you can see in this second wider part of the Gaussian curve we drawn, which is the strict and extended lockdown and vaccination strategy. Then we tried to see an alternative. We found an alternative in a reality, in what is going on around the world. So this projection is based on real and empirical scenario, not what we think or we can project, but what is happening around the world. So what we see in the clear blue is more or less the projection to Malaysia, to what happened in what we can consider in the benchmark, the best benchmark we could consider, which is Singapore. Singapore solved its problem through a campaign of vaccination and lockdown. So if we take the pattern empirically, what empirically happened in Singapore, and you put in the Malaysian economy, you can have, now I don't enter much in detail, but empirically you can draw this curve. As an alternative, we watched an alternative strategy, which is the best example, incorporating the Delta variant. That's why it's so important, so interesting, is given by India. India, as you know, had a percentage of vaccination very, very low, around 5% at the time. And so they took another strategy. They have chosen to use extensively ivermectin. Ivermectin, like others alternative treatments, is not a traditional, is an off-label use of the treatment, and is going to decrease the viral load of the virus, both in preventing that the case becomes more serious and going to ICU, and decreasing the load, becoming less transmissible. So these are the two mechanisms. Simply, we are not doctors, physician. So just to tell you this, but we are interested in the empirical side, not in the theories, not in suggesting. We want to disclaim we don't suggest any treatments, but just to want to see how, if we take the experience and the curve that India experienced using this ivermectin. That's why I point ivermectin, just for this reason. And we put in the Malaysian context, we have this green way out, which is a very short and very sharp decrease in the number of new cases. We formulate, as you can see from the graph, this hypothesis when the number of cases was rising quite recently. It was touching 13,000. Now we are experiencing in the latest day 17,000, and the hypothesis we consider is that the 20,000 can be the peak. If we use ivermectin, ivermectin is able to invert the trend, and so push down this bell curve, invert and going down to the bell curve. Vaccine is less effective according to what we saw empirically, referring, for example, to the Singapore experience, takes more time. So that's why it's more or less takes, if the timing to raise the cases is 1, the timing to go down is 3 or 4 times the time. So this curve taken from the empirical, from what really happened, is asymmetric, it's not symmetric. But in the case of ivermectin, or in the case of India, or not only also India, South America and other cases around the world, this becomes symmetric and very sharply turning. So you can see that we expect here more or less for the first week of August, the peak around 20,000 cases, and starting quickly in this scenario. And in 2 months, more or less, bringing the number of new cases, like it happened in India, back to less than 110%, 110 or 10%. Okay, so this is the first scenario. The second scenario, you can reach a similar trend, but the timing is much bigger, and you cannot, according to what we saw, you cannot reach within this year the first threshold of 4,000 cases that should formally, according to what was fixed by the government previously. Now the government is more in a more flexible evaluation, but based on this grid of values, you shouldn't be able to open and pass to the phase 2 within this year. So you have to wait until January. Okay, so this is the story, and this is we want to see how these two scenarios determine the economic scenario. We not only project the number of new cases, because what we care more, especially now, please, if you can go forward with the next slide. Okay, especially now that the PCR test are found to be not effective, not proper instrument to detect the number. So there is not only the number of cases, but we are interested in the number of deaths. That's very important, and the number of ICU, because this creates different criticalities and different concern in the system. So we projected accordingly these two scenarios at 2 other levels in terms of total fatalities that are linked, strictly linked, of course, to the number of cases, and then also the ICU. This is we report only here the fatalities. Below here we report the daily new death, and the hypothesis that we formulated a couple of weeks ago is more or less 200 that are quite similar to the numbers we see in these days. So up to for the moment seems fitting with what is the progress. And here is consistently the number of whole deaths, to understand what is the situation, what is the impact, and how can we manage this scenario. Going back, I would like, okay, this ivermectin hypothesis, Indian hypothesis, imply a quite sharp decrease in the number of daily which makes the situation quite manageable. This is very, very important because when you invert and you see that the number of daily deaths go down quite sharply, you are in control of the situation. So this opens a very important point that allows you to reopen what we say responsibly. So not drawing based on levels, threshold that you base basically on the previous experience, so the previous wave. But when you see that the trend of these variables, critical variables, is turning and is going down systematically and becomes under control, you can reopen the economy quickly. Okay, so this is the point. It's a dynamic concept, it's not a static concept based on threshold. When you are in control and you are decreasing and managing the whole set of health indicators, you can reopen the economy. The total number of that also is a quite important variable because it's difficult to manage and reopen the economy in scenarios. These are just projections, so just take it as it is. We don't claim to be able to determine, but this is just a scenario. So the magnitude. In the positive scenario, in the more effective treatment, we are more or less leveling the number of total death around 16,000. Instead, it goes until 26,000 in the more traditional and difficult scenario. Okay, so this is for the health scenario. Now we compare also. In the same day, we came out with our scenario. The government anticipated us by a few hours with their. I can tell you these are the two hypotheses of the curve with the two parametric with respect of the dynamic with the speed of the vaccination. If the vaccination is faster, according to the government, you can have an inversion which is a lower number and quick reversion, and the lower number is around 16 according to this number. Or if the vaccination is slower, you arrive to 23,000. Our scenario is quite intermediate. It's quite intermediate about the number of cases. The only things I have to say, we welcome this hypothesis, but I can tell you this is a theoretical model. And that's why it comes symmetric, this bell curve, because instead I think it's very important to rely on realistic and pattern that you see in reality, the typically asymmetric. So we try to consider both this range, the best and a bit the worst one. We can progress with the next. When we put in our these scenarios and relative the hypothesis of reopening, responsible reopening of the economy, we can get these three main paths of the economy. Okay, just to explain what is it. This is the GDP in levels, okay, and in constant terms. So what is normally released by the statistics. Here you see the maximum we reached at the end of 2019. This is the second quarter drop in the GDP. This is the recovery due to the package. Some uncertainty up and down, and now we are waiting the second quarter. In less than 1 month, we will see the second quarter. Here, after the second quarter is already done, we don't know, but it's already done. There are these three options. There is a reopening, which is the green one, because in the first one, in September, we can reopen. That's the hypothesis. If with a positive and successful treatment, we can control the virus, we can invert the curve quickly, and so fully reopen the economy, all the sectors, school including. And so this is a real recovery path. And has to be compared with this path, which is the theoretical path, which implies the rate of growth that previously the economy was experiencing. So is like no COVID-19 happened. So it's a theoretical projection. No, if no COVID-19 happened, the Malaysian economy would likely evolve according to this project pre-COVID growth path. We can, from a lower base, because we have lost time and GDP, but we can, in this recovery scenario, have a parallel line just below. So we lose something, but we can have the same slope. A slope means rate of growth. So the long-term rate of growth is not compromised in this recovery scenario. That's why it's so interesting, this aggressive analysis of possible alternative treatment to reconduct the virus under control. If we don't do anything aggressive, and actually we go very inertial, waiting that the normal curve go below the threshold, we go through this inertia scenario. So we wait, we don't inject additional packages in the economy, just we wait, we give the vaccine, and we wait time. So we see that we are exposed to further weakness. Not only we go down, but we stay down for a long period. So at the end, this projection tells us this, at the end of 2025, we are still below the actual level that we have today. So, and we are below the peak of 2019. So this is a scenario which is in between recession and depression. So here, if you go in the numbers generating this path, we have 3 years of recession. Just remember, the big depression of the 1929 was 4 years of recession. Of course, more depth, but this is very, very serious. So we are facing a situation which is in between recession and depression. Okay, instead, if we take the two hypotheses, one more positive and one more conservative of the government, we project these two intermediate path that you see show some weakness, especially in 2021. We are down, and then there is a slowly inversion, and then we take a path of growth again. But two things: we are again below the recovery path, so that the loss, one-off loss in terms of GDP, is bigger. And secondly, the steepness of this curve is not the same of this and this. So it means that the long-term potential growth of the economy is compromised. I will quantify immediately. Here we are near something around 3.5. Instead, here we keep the 4.7, 4.75, which is the actual long-term growth of the economy. This is very important. Now I will show you. Okay, this is just to give the idea. To drill down a bit in numbers, because we always have numbers. We can go with the next slide on the forecast. And yes, this one, and show what are the numbers. Okay, here, for example, for this year, we the intermediate, so the path representing the government hypothesis in terms of the health, the virus, give us a 3.5% of growth. But actually, we have to qualify immediately. This number is a raw number and has no big meaning. Why? Because we are comparing, the growth is done calculating today's value against 1 year ago value. And the low basis of the previous year gives this impression of growth. Actually, if we consider the traction of the economy, compounding, so considering consistently quarter on quarter what we really grow, this 3.5 plus is equivalent to minus 0.9. So actually it's a year of full recession, practically -1. So I like this interpretation. What is the traction going forward? Forget that yesterday we were to very low level, but going forward, this is telling us that 2021 is not the year of growth. The first quarter may be more or less flat. The second quarter will imply some additional restriction, not only because of the lockdown that we hope we can leave soon, but also because there is a tipping point. Jeffrey Williams were telling you that in October, not only according to our previous analysis, but even according to the survey of the government and also some other surveys in in terms of the distribution, many sectors are facing crash point, disruption. So this is why it's so difficult to turn the economy. So this is what we mean, and this is the lower potential that the economy faces. Before going on, so this is the first row is the raw numbers. How we score, we measure the growth in raw numbers. This is what is the traction of the economy. That for us is more meaningful, and this is the comparison with other forecasters. The first is this an institutional one, World Bank, IMF. They joined the forecast. This year for 2021, they see 4.5. Actually, 4.5 implies like a zero traction for the economy. Instead of putting here 0.9, you put 0 over the 3 quarters, you get exactly 4.5. So actually is a stagnation of the economy. We are a bit more worried. So this is a stagnation. The consensus, this is a Bloomberg consensus, see a slightly bigger growth, but actually is again, basically I translated the stagnation, perfectly stagnant scenario, and is our hypothesis. Let's see what happened in 2022 and 2023, because this is very important. This is the concept that we put in our can extract from our way of measuring in alternative way. The traction of the economy slowly start building up. So in 2022, if you go to the traditional measure, we get 0.1. So basically it's 0. But actually, we start with a very low base, and economies start to have traction. So the real dynamics of the economy can be measured through the compounding quarter on quarter over the 4 quarters as 3.3, which is not bad, and close to the potential that the lower potential that now we have. But the formally the numbers that we compare the forecasters and the government put in accounting taxes and all the other relevant variables for its activities is 0. So this is the surprise effect. Even if we are in the scenario according to the government in terms of health, so we are speeding the vaccination. The vaccination is successful. It's another uncertainty. These are all hypotheses, has to be taken as hypothesis. We hope for the best, but hypothesis before we see the real development. Even if we incorporate in the economy all these positive hypotheses, we reach 0, which is completely a surprise. The market is expecting 5%. So the idea is this, but this 0 has to be evaluated in a much more positive way because something is moving and moving in the right direction and quite with a good pace. Okay, then the good pace consolidate over the years and go to what is called steady state. So the economy slowly reach the potential. This is our idea. But sorry, last consideration, the potential for us due to this deep phase of disruption is not anymore 4.8 that all the forecasters have in mind, which was the potential of the economy before the COVID. COVID disrupted the potential, slow down the engine of the economy, so the economy is not able to perform as before. And this I want just to point out, and then I will pass later to Jeffrey Williams to comment and deep the analysis. When the engine of the car, which I would add the investment, and later I will go to talk about investment, go down, the growth of the economy is not so performing. So we decrease the potential. Decreasing the potential, we have an imbalance because the population keeps going to a higher speed, and to allow all this labor force to find a job, we need a rate of growth which is close to 5, not 3.5. So we have lower unemployment, higher employment. Higher employment, like already we saw, push down salary, so reduce the disposable income, which is the fundamental variable explaining the consumption. So we have the consumption, which is very, very important, drag down the whole growth. That's why you explain this 3.5, okay? Okay, so here we don't converge to 4.8, but we converge to 3.6. And these are big implications in terms of unemployment. The narrative of the consensus is this. We, at the moment, we stop the increase in unemployment. As we saw before, we have other phenomena that are as well concerning, which is underemployment, which is difficult low salaries for young people. But anyway, the narrative, the idea of the consensus is that we go back to 3.5, which is always the previous. So the idea is back to normal. If we go and check this rate of growth and this unemployment, the idea that the market and the main forecaster have is that we go back to normal. The idea that our analysis suggests, even in the most positive scenario of the government, not our recovery, but in the intermediate one, is that there is a different economy, less performing, characterized by higher and increasing structural unemployment. Okay, we can proceed with the next one. Why this happened? I say, actually this is the forecast. Actually, the update yesterday was released by the International Monetary Fund with the addendum to their outlook, and tell you the same narrative of the consensus. I just want to, it's very complex, so I don't want to enter in many numbers, but I tell you something that is quite striking. We never see, watching 2019, we have the world split into advanced economies or mature economies and emerging or more developing economies. Usually the situation is this, more or less, this part of the world has a growth that is more or less the double than the old world. This is what we have in mind, no? Then there is this shock, and this shock hit strongly the advanced economies. Then but you see here with the Asian 5, we see that the Asian 5 is quite important hit. Okay, then we have what is considered the reaction, how the economy adjusts. The idea behind the scenario of the IMF is that there is an overshoot. So I dropped 4.6%. I grow more than the contraction, and this bring back to the old trend. So I have another graph that I didn't add here. For the advanced economies, the idea of the IMF that, of course, I have a loss, but it's temporary. I accelerate and I catch the previous long-term trend in 2022. Okay, so this is the idea. We revert quickly, the advanced economies revert quickly. All these data are the raw data. If you watch the quarter-on-quarter that the IMF gives here, this is the equivalent of the traction measure that we consider. So you see that in this case, at least the 2021 is there is no big difference between the raw data, which is inflated because it depends on the comparison with the low level, and the traction of the economy. So meaning that the advanced economy start, according to this forecast and according to the recent dynamics, start recovering quite importantly. And just one note, 7 United States is very important. And then you go, the real traction is even 8. The IMF link mostly to the vaccination campaign that is ahead and so on. Actually, here there is also a huge fiscal package. I don't enter in detail, but it's huge without expressing it. But it's extraordinary for me, belonging to the euro area, to see something like 5% of growth, real traction. We hope that these forecasts, at least for 2021, are good. But anyway, it's the same narrative. 2021 push up back towards the previous long-term trend. So basically, we are the worst is over. No, the worst is over. That is the idea that comes out from this. Apart from Japan, United Kingdom, Japan is a bit slow, but also United Kingdom has a huge recovery that has been hit strongly by. But the last consideration is this: this rebound is not so strong in emerging markets. So now I watch the projection quarter on quarter. So the traction, I'm interested in the traction. For example, I take the case of China. China is expecting to grow 8.1 in 2021, when there is also the base effect as an important weight. But if you clean this, watching the quarter on quarter, 4 quarter year on year, which is the traction, is 4.2. So it's telling us that it's not a big traction. From the Chinese economy, we used to see different values. And actually, here is quite similar. You see, it's quite similar to Asia, India, Asia 5, India. So this, for me, is more representing the fact that in spite the advanced economies, America and Europe, had the biggest hit from the virus in terms of death, at least from death. In terms of death, the emerging or in developing economies seems more fragile in going back towards the trend, even because the trend is higher, so it's more difficult, of course. Okay, so thank you. This is the narrative of the forecaster locally, internationally, give the same story, which is different from the narrative that we see, from the interpretation that we have. Why we are so negative? Basically, is this. This is the investment over GDP, but we have seen over this year the GDP going down. So even if we watch the investment only, even worse. The investment are the engine of growth, and this investment in GDP is a sort of indicator of quality of growth. How much I'm able to invest in a car which is a faster, more performing engine. You can see that if you go, this trend is downward since many years, at least after 2011. So it's a long-term negative trend, but there's a downturn. You see, COVID-19 bring you down again. There's a reaction, then there's a stabilization. And before COVID-19 and after COVID-19, there are 6 points in this measure that you lose. And this is the reason why you reduce the potential, and then afterward, you are not able even to give full employment and a dynamic economy. Okay, this is the trend. The contribution to this trend comes for 3 different factors. Please, next slide. Okay, this is a bit crowded, but I can give you in a while the idea. These are the investment split in the private sector and public sector, and across different sector of the economy. You can see here graphically, simply, that the state, the government, started to first decrease. The government is this light blue, and the private is dark blue. You see, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, construction, services in total. In all these sectors, you see that the government progressively disinvests, meaning reduce the investment. The growth of investment is reduced, or for example, in mining is always negative. So disinvest. And mining is quite interesting because 100 ringgit in 2015 are equivalent today in 65.6. So 2/3 is the investment today. So, and this happened in all these sectors. So in agriculture is incredible, in mining striking, even in manufacturing after 2017, and in manufacturing after the government, the private sector follow. So it's another important thing. In construction is a bit more slow, meaning 2019 you have already, before the COVID, a stagnant situation. Fortunately, in services, the trend of the private sector is decoupling from the private sector. So this is something important, because the economy is building a tertiary sector, so there is something. But then the crisis bring them all down. So this is the main point. We have that from the government, and then due to the COVID-19, the investment is shrinking. The engine that do not have resources to perform better, and this compromise strongly the long-term potential growth. But this is only private and public. There is another aspect, which is the FDI, the foreign. This happened even before, not 2017 like some sector, but even 2016, like Jeffrey already described before. So we have a peak in 2016, and then we have a trend down. So this is why the one part. The other, I leave the word to Jeffrey to take the analysis and continue. But the idea is this: we have a different view. We have a weaker economy, can perform slower, not only in a cyclical way, but also after the COVID-19. That's our view. And I think the government has to consider a very complex scenario and some other intervention in order to deal properly with this scenario. Please, Jeffrey.
Okay, thanks. Hello. I want to just summarize some of the things that Paolo says. Can you switch off your microphone? Yeah, okay. I want to just summarize some of the things that Paolo has said and also some of the things that I mentioned to begin with in this diagram, which helps us to understand where we are, where we have been, and where we might be going. Basically, this is, if you look at the big blue line there, that's telling us what's happened during 2021. From January to June, during this first 6 months of the year, we have been in a survival trap. What do we mean by a survival trap? Well, basically, households, firms, and the government has been drawing down on reserves, savings for households, primarily EPF, inventories and cash reserves for companies, and the government has also been drawing down on various fiscal incentives and borrowing. And the fact is that the hope was that during that period, by drawing down on those reserves, we would be able to survive for the first 6 months of the year. And the expectation was that after the first 6 months of the year, the local and the global economy would have opened up, and then we would go into a recovery. And that's what we call a tipping point. And that's where we are now, actually, and we're seeing it. The question is, will the economy recover, or will the economy go into a downturn, a deeper recession? So we look at those two options by thinking about whether the economy will achieve strong recovery, and we think probably not, for the reasons that Paolo has just mentioned. There are significant downside problems with the economy. And the best that one would hope for would be that the economy might reach its underlying growth potential, or it actually be under the long-term underlying growth potential. Actually, you remember that the official forecasts were 6 to 7.5%, and those have been blown out of the water. The World Bank is now forecasting 4.5%. We're waiting for the government's forecast, but the Finance Minister Tengku Zafrul has told us it's going to be about that, 4 to 4.5%. Now, we consider that to be, under the current circumstances, quite a strong recovery, and we give that a really relatively small probability that it's going to happen. If the economy is to recover, there is a 45% chance, according to our analysis, that the recovery will be really quite sluggish, subpar, below the long-term growth potential between 2.5% and 3.5% for the reasons that Paolo's just mentioned. We haven't really discussed prices or inflation, so let's just do that very quickly, which is to say that we don't consider that there are very many inflationary pressures on the economy, and certainly not for core inflation. In fact, even the inflation figures for the last month show that there was basically no inflation. And apart from the spike that we're dealing with in headline inflation, which comes primarily because of oil and a base effect, because oil was very cheap last year, it's more expensive this year. We get a base effect. We don't really see very much inflation problems. But what you can see here is, according to our analysis, at this tipping point, we have about a 50% chance of the economy recovering. But actually, that's wrong. It doesn't add up to it, as I said. We actually feel that there is a bigger chance, there's a 55% chance of the economy falling into a recession, a mild recession, which means that the economy won't grow at all or would grow below 2% or around 2%. And there is even a possibility that the economy might go into a deeper recession, and that would be a circumstance where just looking at the news today, where there is a combination of a virus crisis and also a political crisis that might well knock on to an economic crisis, and that might push us into a territory where we would have an even bigger chance of a stronger recession or a depression, or very sluggish growth.
Jeffrey, sorry to interrupt you. Maybe you want to share your screen, because at the moment we are not seeing your screen.
Sorry, you can't see the screen?
No. Yeah, maybe you want to share.
We can see the screen from here.
All right, let me show the screen. Sorry. I thought it was still sharing. Hold on. You can see it now.
Yes, thank you.
Hold on. Okay, sorry. So what I was just talking about there is the survival trap phase, the tipping point phase, and where we are now, what's likely to happen in terms of the vaccine impact, which we'll really be seeing during this period in the next half of the year. And there is a combination now of a vaccine crisis, an economic crisis, and a political crisis, as we can see by this afternoon's news. And so what will that tell us about the likely scenarios? And we think that actually it really is 50-50, unfortunately. We can't be more positive than to say, if there is growth this year, it will be very sluggish at best. I mean, you might be talking 2 to 3.5% growth if you're lucky. And there is a chance that things will get progressively worse, not so much now because of the vaccine or the virus issue, but also now because of the political issues that have emerged today. So that's a summary of our scenarios for growth. Well, what can the government do? I'm going to very quickly go through some short-term, long-term issues. The short-term issue is to say this: the economy can only really begin to recover when the lockdown ends. And people have often asked me, what's going to happen with these stimulus packages? When are we going to see some economic growth from the stimulus packages? And the answer is, you're not going to see very much growth from the stimulus packages until the economy opens up. The term that I've been using is to say, you can't put your foot on the accelerator while you have the other foot on the brake. So you can't pump money into an economy that is shut down and expect that the economy will grow. The money that is being pumped into the economy, firstly, it's only about 20% of the total package, as we saw before. But secondly, it really is there to help people survive through this period. It isn't really there, or it isn't really designed to create economic growth. It's a survival package. Now, we will only begin to see economic recovery when the lockdown ends. How do we get the lockdown to end? Well, we need to see more progress, as we saw in our scenarios, in terms of the control of the virus process. And if we looked at, if you can remember the pictures about the ministry's projections about where we would be in terms of the number of cases, we're not really going to see the number of cases falling to below 500, which would mean a full end to the lockdown. We're not really going to see that until the end of the year at best. And under our scenario, it would be actually not this year at all, unless we have a different approach to the management of the virus. And this approach would be a continuation of the vaccine program to try to improve the rate of vaccination, an enhancement of other forms of control. One, it would include the recommendation by the World Health Organization, which is the so-called find, test, trace, isolate, and treat strategies. A third has been suggested by many industry organizations, which is not to have a general lockdown, but to have a much more targeted lockdown and to use data-driven data analytics to try to forecast places where we might see clusters and then preempt those clusters with preemptive lockdown. And then, as Paolo has pointed out, the use of additional forms of treatment and therapeutics has been shown to be effective in some countries around the world. And the ministry is now looking into this. They are doing tests on various of these prophylaxis and therapeutic treatments, including ivermectin. And we expect those results in September. And if those results are positive and we can see some of those treatments introduced into the management of the virus overall, particularly for 98% of cases which are in category 1 and category 2. Category 1 is no symptoms, category 2 is very mild symptoms. 98% of all of the cases are in those categories, which are very well treated according to some of the evidence by the prophylaxis. If the tests, the clinical trials by the government are successful and we are able to see that introduced soon, then that will help us in terms of ending the lockdown more quickly. And then we will go on to a better trajectory, the green trajectory, and that means the quicker end to the lockdown and a quicker recovery path. Now, in the long term, post-COVID, we have to think about some really important structural reforms, because what's important to remember and to see from the impact of this crisis is that the structure of the economy has changed, and it has changed considerably. And as I mentioned earlier, our experience in Europe is that when an economy is hit with the type of impact which causes structural change, then unless you have policies which address those structural issues, then the negative consequences of that shock to the economy continue into the long term, and sometimes intergenerationally, from one generation to another generation. And here, what we're seeing is, for example, the impact on pension saving will affect people in retirement. The impact on unemployment might, and underemployment in particular, might pass on for very many months, years after the end of the crisis. So we need to look at very significant market-driven or social market-driven policies which look at liberalization of the market, reducing the role of government to allow the economy to grow through the use of a more liberal economic environment. And this would include something which we call responsible privatization, which would mean actually privatizing many of the government activities and putting them into the private sector to help them, to help entrepreneurs in the private sector to be able to take over some of these activities and to generate wealth, value added, and employment opportunities, rather than have them crowded out by government activities. So market liberalization is an extremely important long-term strategy. Addressing unemployment is also going to be an extremely important long-term strategy, and I'll mention something about that in just a second in terms of future of work. Social equity is also very important. What we can see and what we have seen during this 18 months is just how little infrastructure Malaysia has to deal with economic and social issues as a consequence of external shocks. We have seen the country resort to very small cash handouts and even sending food parcels to the most disadvantaged. And that's a consequence of there being an absence of a universal social welfare system, what we call a cradle-to-grave system. That is, people looking after people from when they're born to when they pass away, and at every stage in between. Now, I don't mean a welfare state. I mean a form of welfare support designed by Malaysians for Malaysia, reflective of the needs here in Malaysia. And it can be a combination of private contributions, government contributions, community contributions, zakat, and other forms of charity contributions. Anything that can help us to build a much more comprehensive system to create a social market, an economy driven by liberal market activities, competition, encouraging entrepreneurship, and so on, but at the same time providing a system to look after people who need help at various stages in their life. We also need to focus very much on this retirement issue, because reform of the pension system is essential now. Because people have used up their pensions and withdrawn from their pensions, and we saw the numbers, 6.3 million with nothing in their account 1, 9.3 million with nothing in their account 2. And then finally, this issue of high value versus high tech. Of course, we should invest in high technologies. Of course, we should invest in training people for high technology, but we shouldn't imagine that investing in fourth industrial revolution high technology activity is going to create jobs, for the very simple reason that fourth industrial technology is specifically designed to replace people in the workplace. It's not designed, as it has been in the past, for labor augmentation, using capital equipment to make people more productive. Fourth industrial revolution technologies based on automation, digitalization, robotization, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, intelligent automation processes, things like that. They are specifically designed to replace workers. That's the purpose of that technology. And so if you spend a lot of time promoting high-tech investment, then you may take your eye off traditional types of activity, for example, palm oil, which may not be particularly high-tech, but it is very high value for Malaysia. An example was the announcement recently of a major international automotive company which is setting up a warehouse in Johor, 50,000 square feet of warehousing, a hub for its parts, for its vehicles all around the region. And this is a very significant investment. But the whole point about smart logistics and smart supply chain is that it's all automated. And although you will have a 50,000 square foot warehouse, you will have virtually no people working there because of the use of the high technology. So although it's a very high tech investment, it's not necessarily a very high value investment, certainly in terms of creating jobs. So we need to take a look at these type of activities. Now, Paolo and I have both done some work on this issue of the future of work. And we think that this is an extremely important issue. Prof. Bajoya also mentioned that it's an extremely important issue, and it is. It's very important for us to understand what are the type of jobs and skills that will be in demand in the future. Okay. Now, contrary to what people think, the type of occupations and the type of skills that will be in demand in the future are not technology-driven skills. They're not. They are jobs that we say that these are the type of jobs that resist automation. Because if you are working in a type of employment where your activities, your skills, your tasks can be automated, then your job is at risk. What type of jobs are these? Accountants, for example. If we live in a world where firms are moving toward e-commerce using online banking, for example, online invoicing, ordering through phone apps, every transaction is being recorded electronically. And what that means is that the accounting process is all being automated, streamlined, made very, very efficient. And what that means in turn is that the people who used to do those accounting jobs, picking up invoices, reading through invoices, paper-based, paper trails in order to do the bookkeeping, in order to prepare the accounts, and then in order to audit the accounts, they don't need to be there anymore because many of those tasks, those activities are being automated, and even auditing can be now replaced through blockchain technologies. And so it's actually the type of jobs that resist that form of automation that will be in demand in the future. And these are from our research based on some other research done in the United Kingdom by Nesta. This is some of the types of jobs that will be in demand in the future in the United Kingdom and the United States. Things such as school teachers, social scientists, social workers, entertainers, media and communications workers, even religious workers, secondary school teachers in the United States, sports and fitness occupations here in the United Kingdom, artistic, literary, and media occupations, media professionals, welfare professionals, health professionals. These are all the type of activities which can't be automated. They require human beings. And these are the type of skills and jobs that will be in most demand in the future. Here are some of the skills that people will need to learn in the future. And these are not technology-based skills. These are learning strategies, how to learn. Skills around psychology, originality, fluency of ideas, active learning, active speaking, clear expression, critical thinking, education and training, problem solving, information ordering, inductive reasoning, fluency of ideas. None of these things that have been identified by the extant research on the future of work are related to the type of things that we often talk about when we think about the future of work, which we think about technology, we think about artificial intelligence, we think about STEM type programs, and actually it's the social science, the arts, the humanities, the social interactive approaches that are in the highest demand. And just to finish, this is a table that we have constructed from the Ministry of Higher Education, which looks at where our students are currently focused. 40% of students in Malaysia are reading social science, business and law, mostly accountancy, management and jobs like that, for which, according to the research on future of work, the probability of an increased demand would be only 26%. 16% of our students are studying engineering, manufacturing, construction, applied science type activities, for which the increased probability of demand is only 22%. But if we look down the list, where we look at where is the highest probability of demand, health and welfare, education, arts and humanities, we see only 7% of our students are studying health and welfare, where there's a 100% chance that there will be an increase in demand for those types of skills and jobs. Education, only 7% of people are studying education. There's a 100% chance that there's going to be an increase in demand. Only 8% are studying service and service type activities. There's a 97% chance that there will be an increase in demand there. And only 9% are studying arts and humanities. There's a 92% chance that there will be an increase in the demand for arts and humanities subjects. Now, this is very important when we think about the future, not just the future of work, the future of education, future skills, but also the future of universities and what we do. Where are we going to focus our resources in the future to pivot? Prof. Prem was talking about how successful we've been at MUST in pivoting, and he's right, certainly very, very successful in pivoting toward online teaching and online learning. But we will also need to take a very long, hard look at the type of things that we are teaching, the type of subjects we are teaching, and whether we are teaching the type of skills for occupations that resist automation, because that's a very important structural thing, a very long-term megatrend. Okay, so that's a long-term megatrend. Okay, there you go. Sorry if we overran a little bit, or overran a lot, probably. Okay, so I give it back to Prof. Bajaya. I think you're muted, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Jeffrey. Very enlightening, but very deep. And this is why you have taken so much time. But that's okay. I mean, if necessary, we can continue this in another session later. But let's open for a possible question discussion. Shall I invite anyone? Please, if you have any comment on the presentation.
Okay, Prof, there's one question on the chat box.
Make a comment. I just want to record my immense appreciation for these two wonderful professors who really drilled down every aspect of the pandemic. And I just want to let you know that I have told all my students in the economics classes that today's session was compulsory for them. So I think many students would have taken notes for your session. Yes, but it is amazing job bringing so much information together. I feel like an economist myself after listening to you. Yeah, so thanks very much.
You're welcome. We will turn you into an economist, Dr. Harvey.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, you have three of us here. You're
There was this question here, a very a long question, but quite interesting. How will Malaysian institution survive and sustain when all their current students might have graduated? How open is Malaysian government institution in accepting more international students within and after the pandemic? How has the institution in Malaysia managed to pay its worker salaries and other financial obligations within and after the pandemic? Not really on the policy aspect that we have deliberated, but just curiosity. Would you like to respond to that, Prof. Jeffrey?
Okay, so the first is, how have we survived? How will Malaysian institutions survive and sustain with the current students? Well, I think it's a matter of pivoting. And as Prof. Prem said at the beginning, you know, the higher education institutions have had to make some very difficult decisions during the last year. And some of us have done it better than others. And as he pointed out, some of the things that have been helpful for those who have done it well have been the ones that have been investing earlier in online. I know when I first met Prof. Prem before I came to MUST, he was already very proudly showing us the investment that had been made even before COVID in online teaching and learning. And so I think that was a very good investment, which, I mean, the virus has been a catalyst to move that on more quickly, but it wasn't from scratch. There was some familiarity to begin with. And I know that we are all now actively involved in learning new ways of presenting our ideas and engaging with students and changing the structure. We are now moving or hoping to move much more student-focused teaching, tutorial-based teaching, to try to make sure we can keep and maintain our relationship with our students. Now, that's relatively easy for MUST because, as Prof. Prem said, we are a smaller, agile institution, an asset-light institution, where we're not so heavily invested in some of the things that are more difficult to change. We are more heavily invested in some of the things that are useful for change. So that's helped us very much. The second is about how the government institutions might admit more international students. Well, I think one of the things that I think many people working in higher education have been so upset about is the fact we miss very much our international students. We don't get to see them as much as we have in the past, and we really do look forward to them coming back back into the fold, back into the family, because many of the private institutions in particular, we all have very many foreign students. And at MUST, we have a very good franchising system where we have a very good relationship with our students, even if they're overseas, and we've managed to maintain that, I think, during this crisis. And I think, I hope that the government will do whatever it can to make sure that the international students will help and support after the crisis to come back to us, because I think it's always much better for us to be able to meet and to to see each other face to face. But if we can't, well, we will continue to build our online infrastructure and to make sure we have these engagement processes. Now, the last one is about how are we going to pay salaries?
Yes.
How are we going to pay salaries and other financial obligations? Well, at MUST, we didn't have any problem with that, I'm glad to say. I think at other universities, they might have had more problem with that. But actually, that talks a lot about the other area of research that I do, which is higher education financing. And I have been making a point since 2015 that particularly the private universities have to change their financial model. And they have to change their employment model, and they have to change their overall approach to how we deal with issues of staff employment, staff retention, staff development, and that's going to be a long conversation. I think it's outside the scope of the economics. The economics presentation today. That's a long conversation, but we are going to have to do it. Actually, we're going to have to do it. I don't know if Paolo has some observations about these things, because he also
only
works in the
about
private
this
sector.
last
Yes.
point. Only about this last point. The Asian model about centered on wage flexibility is very efficient and very aggressive when the cycle is strong. Shows some weakness when the cycle is weak. I think a big opportunity for Asia is to link more over time, to give flexibility on the upside, linking to productivity, linking to rewarding the worker to do something original, something creative, to create value and to innovate at small level, at its own level. It's a big chance for Asia, for me.
Right. Any more response or question from the audience? Okay, if there is none, maybe I will quickly conclude. Basically, we have had a very interesting deliberation, very in-depth, and we have gained a lot of new insight into the subject. My own wisdom, perhaps if you can call it wisdom, I'm teaching creativity with Dr. Kamal at MUSD. And basically, what you have projected just now was more like a linear projection based on what it is and what it will become based on the trend. But I am relying on wishful thinking. And I hope that we are going to quickly adopt from this old normal to the new normal. And we should benefit from the capitalizations of this process of rapid migration into the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And if we can capitalize that using this wishful thinking, perhaps we should treat this period as the creative destruction that has the kind of what happened in the 1930s, and so we move from creative destruction to something really new, something that is different from scratch, and perhaps we can grow much rapid from there. Hopefully.
A modern renaissance, Prof.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Yes. Okay, if there is no other comment, I want to again congratulate the two speakers. Thank you for both of you for the wisdom, and every one of you for your keenness in listening, and you also graduated today with excellent for listening to this hard topic. Thank you very much, and we hope that we will continue with this deliberation in the near future. Thank you for MUST for organizing this.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal, as the organizer. All right.
Okay, thanks to Prof. Bajoya, Prof. Jeffrey William, and Prof. Paulo for the wonderful talks. Okay, hopefully we have another session to continue with the talk another day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.